Minister, this Civil Liability Amendment number 2 bill is necessary legislation. People who have been deeply impacted by the recent scandals, such as the cervical check, are asking for it, and they're asking for it now. The fact is that up to the time that Vicky Phelan and Emma McNahuna spoke out to tell people their tragic stories, there were very many people who were under the impression that they would be told if something went wrong or mistakes were made in relation to their diagnosis and their treatment. The hard-working staff of the HSE also need open disclosure. It is more than unfair that they are held responsible for individual actions and decisions at the coalface, while many of those higher up are protected by a culture of cover-up and defence of the organisation. And there really is, Minister, and I have seen it so many times, there is a protectionism within the system. And I would have said that long before I ever came into politics. It was very blatantly obvious that the wagons were circled and there was a protectionism there, and there is, whether it be in relation to physical health or mental health, it does exist. And until we face up to it as an organisation, we're not going to change the culture. But let me be clear, the legislation is not about seeking to punish workers in the HSE. It is a genuine attempt to change the culture within that organisation. The benefits that come from a culture of open disclosure between health staff and patients are self-evident and have been proven internationally. While this bill seeks to legislate for disclosure at the patient health worker level, we are clear that it has to extend to the HSE and to the Department of Health. If either of these are unaware of mistakes, misdiagnoses or any other information that could impact patients, they must make this known. This did not happen in the cervical check scandal. The recent revelation of the deaths of babies in Port Uncla and Port Leash hospitals and the long protracted battle by their parents to discover the truth underlie the need for this change in culture. Although devastated by the deaths of their children, these parents took on this culture of cover-up because it is vital that bereaved relatives have access to the truth. Anything that we as legislators can do to facilitate this should be a no-brainer. The culture that exists at the moment, where patients effectively have to go to war with the HSE, does nothing to foster a positive relationship between patients and healthcare workers. In the West, we recently learned of up to 50 children who were identified in the HSE review of the audiology services of having been misdiagnosed. The families learnt of the report's publication through the media and were left waiting until they saw sight of a copy. The children in question were discharged from the HSE audiology services, only later to be diagnosed with severe and profound hearing loss. I know from these parents that there was a complete vacuum in the communication, where the HSE adopted a shut down and go away attitude. The whole valproate scandal, caused by the wrongful prescribing of a drug to pregnant women, which has led to over 400 children in this state being born with avoidable disabilities, is another example of why we need mandatory disclosure. The government's own legislation introduced voluntary disclosure. The only conclusion that can be reached is that in the months since the legislation was enacted, the voluntary model does not work. It is not robust enough to force a change in the culture that will be to the benefit of workers and of users of the HSE. Therefore, the real argument here is not whether patients deserve and require candour. It is whether every patient should have that right enshrined in legislation, and that is what we are trying to do here today. I would urge all parties and none who agree with this basic right to support our bill at second stage. It is in no way do we claim that this bill is the panacea for all faults and mistakes within the health system. Unfortunately, these will always occur. However, a health system that strives to recognise mistakes, inform the patient and attempt to mitigate any future repeat needs legislation like the bill before us. The current system means that one potential mistake can lead to many more occurring with no checks and balances. That's why we need this legislation, Minister. And I know you will say that there's government legislation going through, and I know you recognise much of what we have said in the contributions here this evening. But I think we would be failing as an opposition were we not to table this legislation. Certainly we will work with you, and I know, as my colleague Louise O'Reilly has said, in the Dáil, we will work with you in whatever way. This is not a competition. It is not a competition whether one bill is better than another bill. It is about changing the culture that we need to change within the HSE, and that is why we need mandatory reporting. Thank you, Minister.